Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today we're going to be replacing the camshaft lifter's head gasket, basically tearing down this 6.2 liter V8. It's very similar to the 5.3 liter as well, so we're talking the L86 and the L83 V8 engines. Some of the other ones from 2019 plus, there's some small variances, but overall the process is pretty similar. So do your research, follow this video, then look at anything that's different on yours, pull up your own torque specs, and just for all those little differences. Also, we are diving pretty deep into the engine, so watch the video to see if it's something you're interested in doing. Wear your safety glasses and take all safety precautions. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We have the vehicle backed in just in case we do have to get an engine hoist in at some point. We're going to start with a 10mm socket, and it helps on an extension like this. We're going after the negative battery terminal. So we're going to go ahead and remove this. We have a lot of electrical in this process, especially the starter, and you do not want to have power and short out things. So we're going to go ahead and come over to the airbox now. Just have a flat screwdriver here. We're going to undo that clamp. We're going to come over here and you're going to push on the bottom of this tab to slide off this little hose here, and there's another one on the other side, so just push down and slide those away. We now are going to undo the throttle body here, at least just where the intake connects to the throttle body. So another flathead screwdriver, we're just removing that. Now we can just slide this entire airbox off and out of the way. Now we're going to come through with our needle nose pliers here, and you're going to see all of these little clips that they have. They're like zip ties, and they're in there pretty firm. So we're going all the way around the intake manifold everywhere we can find these, and we're just basically prying them up and off to get this harness off of the intake manifold. Now, the intake manifold actually has a cover on the top. It looks like the intake manifold, but it's a cover that's going to clamshell away from this, because there are some of these clips on the back of this and they're very hard to get to. So just for a second, we're going to cut forward into the video a little bit just so you can see these clips. They're on the back of the intake manifold cover. They're really hard to get off, so we would recommend getting them off separately once we get the intake manifold out. But this is what they look like. There's 3 of them, and so just keep an eye out for that. You can try to get them off, but you might want to wait till later on in the video, because they're all here right on the back, very hard to get to. So going back, we're going to take off the first 2 studs that are on the front of the intake manifold cover, and there are actually 2 bolts as well on the back side. Now we can go after the actual intake manifold bolts. So if you look at them, they're the gray ones, and they come out, and then you have to turn them sideways to actually get them all the way out. Now you can access these going down through the holes in the intake manifold cover that go directly down onto all of those bolts. It also helps if you remove just the coil pack on the very far driver's side like this and get it out of the way. This is going to help you get in there to one of these back ones. So you pull up on the tab, the red release tab, and then you pinch it, and that will get that coil pack out of your way. And so then as you see back into this corner, now you can have access to one of these back intake manifold bolts. Now these bolts, you want to take them out all the way because they will fall back down in and prevent the intake manifold from coming back out, since they do have that lock on them. So next we're opening the lock on the throttle body connector here, so we're just pulling it forward and then we're going to pinch it. And so then this will slide right off, a little help with the screwdriver there. The alternator also has electrical pin, just going to pinch that one. Now we have another breather hose here, so same thing, just pinch it and then slide it off. Over here there's another one that has a lock. We're going to slide it out with the screwdriver, then we're going to pinch on the back of it, and then it's going to slide off. Now we have another breather hose here, so again just push in on the gray tab and slide it off. Now the intake manifold, we're going to be able to lift this up, and we're basically clamshelling it out of here. Again, those bolts for the intake manifold will keep it from coming out and they'll fall back down in. So we want to extract all of these, and that's really going to help you. We also took this part out here for the throttle body just so we could turn it over and you could see what its clip looks like. I wouldn't recommend taking this out, but anyway, the clip on this you push down with a screwdriver to get that gray tab back, and then you're going to pinch it, and we're going to go ahead and walk that one off. So that's for the throttle body. Now we can walk the intake manifold out. If it's not coming out, make sure all the intake manifold bolts are out because they will fall back down and keep it in there. Vacuum this out the best that you can. Our intake ports are now open and you don't want anything falling down into the intakes. So we can go ahead and lift up on the cover here, as you can see, and we have a mat that we're going to take out. We put trash bags in all the intake manifold ports for now, and then going back to this, if you haven't done it already, it is easier to pry these out once you have the intake manifold out and you have a little more room. So again, we just went through with our pliers and we popped all these Christmas tree tabs out, but this cover was a nightmare. This harness is in there really well with these big clips there, so we just got behind them and popped them off. And so again, we'd recommend doing that part after the intake manifold is removed. But if you can get back in there, you can. So we're going to go ahead and take out this mat now. And this is a foam piece that covers our fuel system. And so you want to be careful with it. Of course, we vacuumed it off first, but you can still see all the dirt and everything that's down in here. So we're going to go ahead and whack this down, but that can be pretty dirty. So now we have our fuel rails and everything that are exposed here that you can see. Okay, next we're going to go ahead after the serpentine belt, so a 1/2 inch breaker bar we're pushing down on the tensioner, and then we're just taking the belt off. We're going to slide it through the pulley. Now we have a 24mm socket, so this is for going on the crankshaft, and we're going to be able to walk this belt off. This next one's the AC belt. It's a stretch belt, so you pull on it, and then as you rotate the crank, we're walking it off. That's the way that you get this off if you want to keep the belt, otherwise you cut the belt. We're using the same process for our vacuum pump over here on the right. We're just pulling on the belt as we turn the crankshaft, and it walks it right off. An old O2 sensor harness worked great to pull on it, so we went ahead and yanked that one off. Again, watch those trash bags so they're not getting sucked into the engine while you're doing this. Okay, we got our 13mm socket here, taking off the alternator bolt. Make sure the battery is disconnected like we did in the beginning. So we're going to go ahead and take this off and put the nut back on so we don't lose it. The alternator is just 2 of these bolts here, 15mm. So we're going to take off both of these, and they're very long bolts. They're in there pretty firm, and the alternator's pinched in there. So go ahead and remove these 2 bolts. The one on the left was really long, as you could see, and this alternator is going to be stuck in here pretty tight. It's almost pressed in to the bracket. So we're going to come and grab a pry bar and just give it a little bit of a pop here, and now we can walk the alternator out. So now that the alternator's out of the way, we're going to come in here with our 13mm. We're going to take off this bracket here that's holding our air conditioning line away from the engine, but it needs to come off. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. We like to put bolts back everywhere we can so we don't lose them. Now we're coming in here with our 13mm, and we have a ground there that we're removing. We have the bracket for the air conditioning that we're removing, and we have the air conditioning bolts themselves. So we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 bolts for the air conditioning system. So one is really long, comes right off that AC compressor. There's a really deep one here, a 15mm, and so that's going to be another really long bolt for our alternator bracket. And we're going to take a 5mm socket that's really small. We're putting it on the front of this air conditioning one, and we're taking the stud itself out. Okay, so that had a nut on the front of it. Now we took the stud itself out, and we can basically pry on this and get this alternator bracket off. But it was attached to the air conditioning as you just saw us remove it. So now we have the alternator bracket out of the way. We're going to come back in and we're going to take off the tensioner. Now we're going to come in with 2 of our 10mm bolts, I think they were, just to take off our radiator fan. So we're going to move that line out of the way. The lower hose can just be pulled out, Here's our clips for the radiator fan. As you see, you push down on it and you slide these ones off. So they take a little wiggling there, but we're going to go ahead and remove one. Now it has the same plug on both sides, but one's reversed where you can't see it as well. We've got a Christmas tree plug here that we're removing to get it away from, get this harness away from the electric fan. So I'm just going to walk that out with a pair of pliers. Okay. We also have a Christmas tree plug for our two air conditioning line heat transcooler lines. Okay, now we're going to bring in a little funnel here. We're going to drain the coolant out of the radiator. So the upper hose here, we're going to get a lot of it out. We're going to also take our pliers and take off these two. This is for the water pump. We're trying to get as much coolant out of here as we can. Now these two lines that are leaving the water pump will go up into the heater core in the firewall, and so these are really hard to get off with these clips. So something we did is we put a zip tie around the back of the tab where you're supposed to pinch it, and by zip tying it tight on that tab, it's pinching it for us, and we slid it right off.
There we go.
This top one goes here. The left one here. Now we're going to go ahead and use a shop vac, and we're going to suck out as much coolant as we can. With our pliers coming up on the top where the thermostat is, we're going to pinch this little connector here and just remove that bracket off of it. So again, that's going into the thermostat. We're going to pop that hose off, get it out of the way. We're going to leave the thermostat on as we pull the entire pump out. There is another clip here for our coolant temperature sensor. You lift up on the tab. This one had broken previously, and then you pinch and remove it. Okay, next for this one, we're going to pull the safety tab out, and then we're just going to pinch on that safety tab at the back and slide that one off. The one to the right has another safety tab, so we're going to take our pick and we're going to pull the red tab out, and then we're going to pinch on the front of it and then slide it off as well. A little tip here too is sometimes we will spray a little bit of Windex on these and let it kind of work its way in there and slide these off, but of course you don't want to get a lot of water or corrosion inside the plug, but that's just something every once in a while we can do. So this one slid right off. Okay, we've got some more Christmas tree clips here that we're removing for the harness going across the front of the water pump. Then we have this nut right here that we're taking off for the stud. That's just a wiring harness bracket. There's another one on the very far end of the water pump as well. Now we're just working around the water pump. Everywhere we find a bolt for it, we're removing it, and we'll show you that in a minute. We're going to take off the lower hose here as well, and now we can remove the water pump. So just watch out for all of the bolts because there are some that are hidden down in there. So just follow the water pump itself all the way around. On the side of the water pump, there's also a bracket that was keeping it from coming out. So here's what the water pump looks like. There are two gaskets on the front that come right off. And next we used a shop vac to get as much of the coolant out of it as we could. We just don't want any of it going into the cylinder heads. Here's the bolts for the water pump. Next, we're looking at the steering shaft. We marked it with the relationship here so we know to put it on exactly how it came off, and it just uses some 15mm bolts. So we're taking two 15mm wrenches here and going in opposite directions for the bottom one. So we're going to go ahead and remove that one, and it comes out like this. Now we're doing the same with the top one. It has a locking bolt, and once those are out, we can slide it up off of the steering rack and then down off of the steering column shaft. Next we're going to take off the heat shield bolt, so just 10mm, and there's three of these, one here, there's one back here, and finally there's also one a little bit lower on the heat shield down here. So just remove those three 10mm bolts. Okay, so there's also one for the dipstick tube for the oil. Next, we're going to go ahead and take off the heat shield on the passenger side. Same thing, it has two bolts up top and then one down below, 10mm. We're going to go ahead and remove this out of the way These are where the bolts were.
Okay, ready?
Now we do want to pull the ignition leads out, so pliers might help, but you don't want to tear these. The best way is basically grabbing it with your hand and twisting it. And sometimes you'll hear a pop because you're breaking it loose off of the spark plug. It's so you just got to kind of twist these and pull on them. And so just be as careful as you can. The metal part is more of a heat shield that just spins, so it's not going to really do anything for you as far as trying to pull on the metal part. So you're just kind of pinching on it itself, on the rubber on the end. So go ahead and twist it, and that's breaking it loose off of the spark plug, and then it will pull out. So we're going to go ahead and just wiggle these out the best that we can. Okay, and so they can be a little stubborn. This one had the part come off. Now, PB Blaster, you want to spray all of the exhaust manifold bolts. I let mine soak overnight. Okay, so once all these were up and out of the way, now we can go after the exhaust manifold bolts. And it's really nice. There's only 5 of them on each side down the center. So we're just taking a ratcheting wrench here. That was our best tool to use for that. Once it's off, we can slide our exhaust gaskets out. Okay, from underneath the car, what we're going to do is take some long extensions and remove the 3 bolts that hold the exhaust manifold in. So they're just nuts that come off, and it just slides right off. So very easy. So we used a 15 millimeter shallow socket to get the right angle on that. But we also needed a deep socket on the passenger side. The studs are longer. So with long extensions, we got up in here, and we were able to get these off. But you can see there's 3 of them, and these ones had studs, as you can see, that were a lot longer on the passenger side. So we did need to get up in there with the deep socket, and it worked out just fine. So we just did the same thing on the passenger side, removed all the exhaust manifold bolts. Okay, we're going to come and do all of the ignition lead here on the passenger side. So what we're doing is just pulling up on the tab and then pinching. We're going to do this on the passenger side and driver side. Okay, now we can take this cover. It's really just a fake cover that's going over the top. And it's just clipped on, so just pull directly up to pop it off. And then we can walk it forward. And we can even remove this positive crankcase ventilation tube as well. It doesn't need to be on there, so go ahead and pinch the gray tab like we've been doing earlier, and we can just pop that up and out. So you just push on that tab, pop it off. So now we can get this fake cover out of our way. It's just a piece of plastic. Okay, now we're coming through, and basically there's another bracket here that was somewhat hidden. We're going to take that off. Okay, driver's side, same thing. We're pulling the tab up, and we're pulling all of these coil pack, ignition coil packs off. So just disconnect all those. Now we're looking at our fuel system here. You see the 2 fuel rails on each side with the high pressure lines going through, and we're going to remove that high pressure pump in the back. So it has a plug here, electrical one, and it's hard to see, but it does have just a pinch tab on the back of it. So we're going to go ahead and pinch that and slide that off of the high pressure fuel pump. So as you see, we pinched it and slid it off. We used a little bit of Windex on this one as well, just to kind of lube it up. On the right hand side, there's a locking harness over here. So we push the lock up forward, and then we're pushing down right here and sliding this one off. This one again was stuck pretty bad too. Just a slight little bit of Windex to get in there and lube it up. Again, you don't want to get that into the electrical connection itself, but that just really helped kind of slide that off. On the driver's side, on that side of the fuel rail, there's another one. It's the same thing. It's just in there backwards. Next, make sure you have your safety goggles and depressurize the fuel system if you want by pulling the fuel pump fuse. Ours has been sitting, but we go ahead and pop the safety clip off. And we're going to take our 3/8" fuel disconnect tool, and we'll show you how this works.
Push forward on the line, push in. There. Okay, there's no pressure, so we're okay. So let's just show that again too. So go around the line, forward on the line, in with the tool, slide it off.
We then put the fuel line in a bag and zip tied it to keep it clean. So again, be careful, you don't want fuel spraying on you. We're going to use an 11/16 or a 17mm line wrench. Either one of those sizes seem to fit okay. 17 is a little bit better. And we're going to basically put it here, and just remember, you might have more fuel spray out, so you got to be careful. But we're breaking that loose counterclockwise, and we're just turning this one here. We're sliding this one off here. Now these are one-time use lines. They are not supposed to be reused. So we're going to go ahead and everywhere we've removed these, we're replacing the line with a brand new one. So again, they just kind of break right off. You might have some residual fuel coming out of them, but we're going to go ahead and just slide these off. There's one that's bolted down in the middle, so we're going to go ahead and just remove that and remove it on the fuel rail sides. Okay, we're going to leave our fuel rails connected to the cylinder head. Next, we're going to take this hose off entirely. We're going to take a 10mm socket now, and we're going to go around the outside of the valve cover everywhere that there's a bolt. Don't worry about the coil packs themselves or the other stud there for holding that fake black cover off. But once we remove all of the outer ones only, we can pop this cover off, and now we can see our valve train. So as you can see, these are the holes. And so we're going to go ahead and take our 5/8" spark plug socket, and we're going to take out the spark plug for cylinder number 1. So on this GM vehicle, cylinder number 1 is the driver's side front cylinder. So we're going to take the plug out so we can see down in here.
Bags out. Now what you're going to see as you turn the crank is the intake valve will open, and then it will close, and then the exhaust one will open and close. So right as the exhaust one closes and we see the piston coming to top dead center, we know we're on the exhaust stroke.
So what we're doing is with our camera, we're watching the piston go up, and then right when it's about to start coming down, we know we're at the top dead center, and that's where we want to be before we try to remove our high pressure fuel pump.
Valve is opening.
So we're just turning the crankshaft with that 24mm socket, and so we're watching that piston come up, and right when it starts to come back down, we're at top dead center. We're going to stop there and then remove our high pressure fuel pump.
And the intake valve is closed. Piston coming up. And now the exhaust valve is starting. Almost to the top there. You see it just start to go back down there, right there. Okay, so let me reverse it. Go back up just a little bit. There, that looks like it's top dead center.
Now that we're at top dead center on the exhaust stroke, we can continue with our high pressure fuel pump. And so on the side, we're going to pry off the side of this clip, and we're going to remove these harnesses to give us more room to the bolts for the high pressure fuel pump. So they're a little tricky and a little tight. So now we have a 13mm, and what we're doing is we're removing these bolts evenly on both sides. There is a big spring mechanism because the high pressure fuel pump here is being operated off of the camshaft. So if the camshaft is at the wrong position, it can be putting pressure on the bottom of this pump and damage it as we're trying to take it off. So that's why we had to put the cylinder at top dead center on the exhaust stroke is the recommendation. So as you're starting to take these out, you can see it should come out evenly. It might rise a little bit, but now we can pull the high pressure fuel pump off.
You're looking at the ones that are up.
Next, we're going to remove the rockers and the push rods. So we want to go on to these ones that the spring does not have pressure on first. I believe it was an 8mm to break this loose. And then what we want to do is remove these and keep them in order in how they came off, and then pull out the push rod and keep that in order. So it is best to keep these in order. If you're going to reuse these parts, they should go back exactly where they came from. Now back to our crankshaft, you can turn the crankshaft back and forth, and as you see, what it will do is release the tension on the spring that we're working on, and then we can go on to the next one. So as you see, we took the pressure off that spring, and now we can break it loose. Now, something we did just for reference is we took a laser level when we knew the crank was at top dead center and made our own marks on it, since GM doesn't seem to have any of these marks on their timing cover. And so this is completely optional. We just like marking things up ahead of time in case we ever need to use them later. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the starter. So we're going to come under the vehicle. Again, make sure the battery's disconnected for this, as we did in the beginning. There's still power going to the starter otherwise. So there's just two 13mm bolts that are going straight up into the starter, and then off to the side there's some 10mm bolts for the little heat shield and a dust shield on the transmission. So just go ahead and start with those. Okay. Take that out right there. Okay, two 13mm bolts for the starter. Just slide it right out.
It's missing too.
10mm bolt out. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and take out the head bolts. There are a total of 10, and so we're gonna go in reverse sequence of how we tighten them down. So the first one we're gonna remove is the 10, then we're gonna go 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, then 2 and 1. We're gonna do 90 degrees on all of them. Then we're gonna go back and do 180 degrees on all of them, and then we should be able to take the bolts out from there. Okay, bolt number 10. Okay, breaking it loose. 13mm Allen. You will notice that on the driver's side, the very front bolt is actually a 13mm hex. So you will need to get the little 13mm hex socket for this, and then the rest of them are the 15mm bolts. Okay. This one is actually an Allen, 13mm Allen. So when we break this one loose, okay, 90 degrees. And now we're gonna go in that same sequence. Back to, then these ones, those ones, and then the center. Okay. We did have to go to a smaller breaker bar to fit into the back one, so you might need different ones. So after breaking them all loose 90 degrees, then going back through and doing 180 degrees in the same sequence, then we could take the rest of the bolts all out and lift off the cylinder head. So this technique just helps the cylinder head be evenly taken off and supposedly helps it from warping. Now on the back of the cylinder head there was a ground as well, so make sure that you take this off.
Right, there you go.
Cylinder head's out, pulled it with the fuel rail so it didn't drop junk into the cylinder. Next we removed the old head gasket, and just make sure that you're careful taking it off, and you don't want a lot of things falling down into the engine if you can help it. Next we used a 10mm socket to break loose the lifter trays. So we went ahead and just broke it loose and removed it. Make sure this doesn't fall down in there, and keep it handy because you'll be reusing this bolt.
Let's turn okay, the trays are going to come out, and it's going to have our collapsible DOD ones here, and then the regular lifters are still inside. Okay, so this came out like this. I've got the holes here in the bottom, and it is squared off so they don't turn side to side. Here's our rollers. These ones look good. Oh, yeah. Okay, just using a magnet to pull this one out.
You'll see the line that's engraved in this one, meaning a little piece of metal most likely got stuck down in there. That looks a little chewed up.
I think that's where we're getting our squeaking. Okay.
This is the back two.
Back to our DODs. Okay, so we're doing the same thing, taking these out 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 90 degrees first on all of them, then 180 degrees, and then another 180 degrees till they're out. Okay, one of these on the back of the head. Roller looks really good. This one came out, so yeah, it's like that arrow is on the top.
Okay. Okay, so the main takeaway here is that we didn't have a problem with our displacement on demand cylinders. That could have been a problem in the future. I was afraid I was going to bend a push rod, and so I did want to delete that system while I was at it. But the real problem we really had was one of the traditional rollers had eaten up. And here's one that wasn't as bad, but if you see the lines in it, that's from metal debris getting down in and carving into the roller. And so this was the lifter that was past the very bad one. This one, as we shake it, you could hear it was starting to go out, so it wasn't too far behind the other ones. But the worst one was this one here. So if you look at this, you can see how very badly pitted this is. That roller is completely eaten away. So that metal, all the metal shavings from that have gone throughout the engine in other places, and that's the concern now. And you can see where those pieces of metal have gotten stuck in the other lifters and caused the lines in them and everything like that. So this one sounds like a maraca as we shake it. You know, this one's bad. This one's completely horrible. Now, once I knew that a lifter was bad, I knew that the cam would also be bad. So that's the whole idea here. And going to a DOD delete, that it would require a new cam anyway. That was the direction we wanted to go. But if you look down and you look and see the cam, you can see the lines in it where the other bad lifter was making its damage to the camshaft, and then the other part was even worse, where that really bad lifter has eaten it away. So there's really not much you can do here. The cam would have to be replaced anyway, so great time to delete this this displacement on demand or this active fuel management. These collapsible lifters can fail in the open or closed position, and they can bend push rods or cause misfires, and so it was a system I wanted to delete anyway. But here's a look at the cam as well. If you look where the really bad roller was on that really bad lifter, you can see how badly it ate the cam up. So at this point, there's nothing you can do other than swap the cam out anyway. So great time for the DOD delete, which is what we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Pull in the bag, and the bag breaks open. This has like a... Next, we're going to get into cleaning up the cylinder heads, and so we have this foaming gasket remover from Permatex. This stuff worked really well. However, one bottle did one of the cylinder heads, so you really want to buy enough of it that you can be cleaning off both the cylinder heads and the block where this mates. So you would need probably 4 of those or more. We then resorted to basically plastic scrapers, and we were also using microfibers with a brake parts cleaner. Now at this point, this is where you might want to think about taking your heads somewhere to have them gone through, decluttered, also maybe even milled down. So that's up to you, and if you had any kind of overheating issues, if you had blown the head gasket, that's where you could have some really bad warpage in the cylinder head. So at this point, this is where you want to consult a machine shop and get an idea of what you should be doing to have your heads gone through and milled down and cleaned properly. So we just went through, we let this sit and soak, and then with brake parts cleaner, we went and cleaned up everything that we could, mainly where the head gasket's going to be sealing. And you want a nice clean flat surface across the whole thing so there's no high points in your head gaskets that are going to be hit. So you can see the factory machine marks on here. This looked pretty good. Anyway, this is a long, tedious process here, and we're trying not to get junk down into the water jacket holes for the coolant. So do the best that you can to clean these up. And again, I really recommend at this point, you might want to just take your heads to some machine shop that you trust and consult with them and see what they want to do. But one huge area of concern are the injectors, especially if they're left in. You can see how gunked up this was, and so we basically cleaned this off with brake parts cleaner and a microfiber with a screwdriver on the end of it. Very gently went around and cleaned those up. The fuel has been spraying through these, but you can see how gunked up these are. It's amazing that the engine was running as well as it was. Next, we're going to remove the radiator. We want to make sure that there's room to get the camshaft out. So you want to take a pick, and if you're looking at the front of these radiator lines, you come in behind it with the pick, and you have to pry these little rings out. And so you'll get a good idea here what this looks like. So just get under it on one side, and as it pries up, make sure it doesn't fling across into the engine bay where you can't find it, but you're basically prying one side up and out of that little notch that it's in. So the radiator has lines on both sides. On the driver's side, it's going to be for the transmission cooler, so you will lose a little bit of the transmission fluid, but as you can see, we're just popping that clip out from one side, getting it out of that little channel notch, and then pulling the clip out. So be careful with these and put them somewhere where you won't lose them. Then the lines just pull straight out, and so you're going to do that on all of these. This line I'm working on, you see the transmission fluid start to come out here, and it's pretty tight, and this one loops around to the back side where it then goes in to the AC condenser. So pull all of these lines out, and then the top one, we're going to move a line here. This is on the passenger side, so we're going to go ahead and remove that off. There's a 13 millimeter bolt on each side for the radiator itself, so go ahead and remove both of those. There's also this little radiator hose here at the bottom, and we've drained the fluid, so not a lot's coming out. To get to the little bracket that's down in here that's holding the radiator to the AC condenser, we can get in here okay. It is easier if you take the air box out. Now, the radiator sits down inside of the AC condenser, so you're actually lifting the AC condenser. You're pushing down on this tab, and you're lifting the AC condenser up and then out.
Okay, so we need to lift this tab and the bottom tab up first, and that gives you a lot more wiggle room. Then on this side, it's the same thing. This tab has to come out, it lifts straight up and out, as well as this tab is lifting up and out as well when we push in that tab, just like the other side, but it helps to get one side loose first, then the other.
So we're going to go ahead and leave the AC condenser in so we don't have to discharge the AC system and just remove the radiator. So now we're going to remove the mass airflow meter. It has a locking tab that we lift up on, then pinch, then the air box can pop out. That will give you a lot more room. Now what we're doing here, we're marking the relationship on the crankshaft for top dead center, since we did remove that spark plug and we could see we were at top dead center. And this is just, again, for our knowledge. Next, we're going to install our crankshaft holding tool that goes on the flywheel. So we had removed the starter earlier, and what we're going to do is put this on up in here. It just put the 2 bolts in where the starter bolts go, and you'll see the little teeth will start to mesh with the flywheel. Now at first it won't be lining up just perfect, and it really helps to have somebody up there just kind of wiggle the crank back and forth slightly, and these teeth will line up a little bit better. And as you tighten it down, those teeth will lock into the flywheel, and that will keep the flywheel from moving. And what that's going to do is allow us to break that crankshaft bolt loose without the engine spinning, because an automatic transmission will spin even when it's in park. So we're going to go ahead and install this tool, and we will be installing and reinstalling this tool, taking it off and putting it back on several times throughout this process. But that's what it looks like, and the tool worked really well. So just make sure you put those 2 bolts in, don't cross thread anything. I used an extension to get up in there and get those bolts started, but what we want to do is make sure that we have that flywheel locked and in place. 24 millimeter now, we're going to go ahead and take the crankshaft bolt out, and so we're going to hit this with an impact. We do have our locking tool for the transmission that we've installed that helps keep the crankshaft from moving if you need to do that too, if you don't have an impact. The impact, you can actually take this bolt out without having to really hold the flywheel still, and that is a one-time use bolt. Next, we're taking our 3-jaw puller, and so we're putting the puller through the crankshaft, and it's locking onto the back of the crankshaft here. And so this is kind of how we have it set up. We have a bolt that we're putting down the center, and so that way it's going to come in and stop on the crankshaft, as you see here. Now our puller, this part here was actually too short, so what we did was we put a socket on the end of it just to act as an extension. So as you see, we have a socket that's pushing on the bolt, and now we're just turning this and walking the balancer off. And so that's how the 3-jaw puller works. And check the video description, we'll put some links on some similar ones to what we have here. But that balancer came off pretty easy. It is keyed, so there is a keyway on it. Next, we're going after our vacuum pump, and so this is for the brake system. This is optional. I've seen people leave this on, but I've also heard that metal shavings can come out of this pump when it's bad. So we're taking off the vacuum line there with that clip, and then we're just using 13 millimeters. There's 4 of these bolts that we're taking off, and then the entire pump will come off. Okay, so it's a little harder to get to these. So there's also a little clip here that's holding a harness in, so we're just going to pop that out of the way. And then, yeah, it's just 4 bolts. It comes straight off. As you can see here, you'll see it with it off here. So 4 bolts. One of the bolts tends to stay in place, and that's what it looks like here. So this is just another recommendation. I wanted to change this out because it had 100,000 miles on it, and this is the best opportunity to get in here and take this off. But again, I have seen people leave this on or just loosen it to get it out of the way for getting the timing cover off at the front. But next, we're going to go after our little Vlom cover here. These are 13 millimeter bolts, just going all the way around, prying it up with the screwdriver, and this will pop right off. There's no connections inside. It just has all the brains for the cylinder deactivation. There is a gasket here, as you see. Most of the time you can reuse that gasket. We had a new one come in our kit, and now you're seeing these are the holes that we're going to have to plug. So we have our Brian Tooley Racing DoD plugs. So these plugs are tapered. They have a little rim at the top, so you can kind of put them in by hand and push down on them until they pop in. When you're driving these in with a hammer, I would recommend a rubber mallet or a plastic hammer, because you can chip the corner of these. So this is what they look like going in. Make sure you don't drop them down into the engine. So we're going to go ahead and you set these in here, and then you can give it a little tap. You'll see it kind of pops down into place, and then we're just going to drive it down. And then you will hear it bottom out and make a different sound, and that's how you know it's flat. Just don't break them. Okay, we're going to remove these little Christmas tree tabs that are holding this harness in place. So this is right below where the crankshaft is. So we're just getting some pliers to kind of pop this off, and that just gives us a little more room. There are 2 of our 13 millimeter bolts here for the timing cover that are on the bottom, and so they are kind of hard to see because you're coming up from the oil pan, and so just make sure you don't forget those two. And then we're going to go ahead and break off the rest of the timing cover bolts. We're working our way around, and you do have to be careful. There are some that are hidden down there, so you might think that you've got them all. There's a little bracket here we're going to remove, and if you saw behind it, there's another one there. So this is a 1/2-inch drive or 13 millimeter. Make sure you get all of these bolts out as you're prying this off, and be careful as you pry it off not to mar the mating surface. There's an electrical connection on here. You cannot get to it because it's down under into the oil pan. So we're going to leave this cover down here. I did unloop it so that we had a little bit of more room here.
Timing cover has two coming from underneath the oil pan. The next two up are long on each side, and then they're the same.
Now, this is very critical when reinstalling. These longer bolts have to go in where they're supposed to. The shorter ones have to go in where they're supposed to. Some people have put the longer bolts in higher up, and it's actually damaged the cylinder as it pushes in too far. Now this is where we're looking at our timing dot. This is how we know with that arrow that should be pointing directly down, and that's going to be top dead center on the engine. Now when setting the timing with the oil pump out of the way, you would be able to see on the bottom of the screen there, you see the dot on the crankshaft, and then at the top you see that the arrow was pointing down. That's the arrow that we can see. So we're going to assume that we're at top dead center on piston number 1, because we've locked the crank into place. And so to explain top dead center a little bit more, that's where the piston has made it all the way to the top, and it's just about to start heading back down. So that's how they set up the timing on these. And so it's going to be the driver's side first piston is piston number 1, and that's when that arrow is going to be pointing at that dot. Now you'll also see other videos where people are doing this same procedure and their arrow is pointed up, and so you kind of freak out a little bit, and the reason why is that's just the orientation of the camshaft. Now we will get into this later in the video, but as you see the camshaft, there's a dot there at about the 3 o'clock position. So that's when that nub is there, that arrow is going to be pointed down. If that nub were at the 9 o'clock position, the arrow would be pointed up, and you could still be at top dead center. So we just want to be consistent. We want to set it to top dead center, cylinder number 1, driver's side, with that arrow pointing directly down. And then as we take everything apart and put it back together, we want it to line back up. So we'll show you that later on the video. But what we did in this case was get it to top dead center, cylinder number 1, arrow pointing down, and then we locked the crankshaft so that we would know that the crankshaft has not moved, and that that dot that we cannot see is pointed directly at our arrow. Okay, so this is so important, I'm going to cover it again. We want to make sure that you have removed the starter by taking out those 2 bolts, drop the starter down, and that you have installed this flywheel holding tool. This is going to ensure that the crankshaft does not move because you cannot see the timing dot on the crankshaft. So we're at top dead center, and we've locked the crank with this tool. So if you don't put this in, then as you're fiddling around with the cam phaser and you see the arrow for the camshaft that's pointed straight down, that looks great. You will not know if the crankshaft dot is directly up as it should have been. So please do not skip this step. Make sure before you're going any further with the project that that flywheel holding tool is definitely in place, because you're doing it blind. You cannot see the crankshaft timing dot. So by locking the flywheel in place, that kind of guarantees you that the crank has not moved, and so you can just go off of the camshaft arrow pointing straight down. So just make sure that that flywheel holding tool is in place. You may have to remove and reinstall the holding tool during different processes to turn the crank, so just make sure it's on at this point. Okay, and so we took our paint pens and we made several marks on the chain links so that we're going to know as we put it back on how everything is lining back up. Now that doesn't mean that all we have to do is line up the top part. We have to make sure that the chain hasn't come off on the bottom. It's all going to come down to the arrow pointing straight down, but putting these marks, the red, white, and blue on here, will help us as we line everything back up and then check our timing to know if it's where it should be. So we will show that later in the video, but I wanted to explain it now a little bit. Now we're doing this job without removing the oil pump. These are oil pump alignment tools, and they were not very good at all. But the idea here is the oil pump has to be perfectly centered. So you would put these tools into place where you could remove the oil pump and put it exactly back where it came. But these tools were not very good, and we were doing everything we could to not remove the oil pump, because if it's not perfectly centered, you can have low oil pressure, you can ruin the pump itself. So what we're doing is we're removing the chain and everything, and doing so leaving the oil pump exactly in place and not touching it. These tools did not work very well. As you see, they only touched the top of the oil pump. It would be better if they kind of wrapped around it, so you know that you're putting it exactly back where it was. But yeah, we didn't use them at all. Also, just so you know, you cannot remove this oil pump fully without dropping the oil pan. Okay, you will also go through with your scraper and clean all the mating surfaces on the oil pan and the timing cover face. So we went through just for our reference and made some other marks where the keyway was, where the timing chain currently was. And again, you don't want to just line these back up and think that you're good. You might still be off on your timing because the chain will come off. And the chain itself doesn't have to be in any particular place. It's that timing arrow has to be pointed down. And so we just wanted to do this to try to help set us up as we're putting everything back on. And what you'll see later in the video is that did help us get it in the general direction, but we still can be off by a tooth or so, and we'll have to make adjustments. So we'll show that later in the video. But it never hurts to make some extra markings, so we just did one on each side of the keyway and drew a line so that we knew where the keyway was when we were at top dead center. Next, we want to release the tension off the tensioner, and so what we're going to do is bring in a little pole, little rod here with a soft tip. With an extension, we're just pushing on the end of this, and as you see, we're pushing right here on the chain. And so as you push on the chain, it will start to collapse the tensioner. And so as you're pushing on it, then what you'll want to do is line up a small Allen key that will go through this hole and through the tensioner. And so as we keep pushing on this, we can just line this up and push this right through.
Got it.
Now we're taking our 24 millimeter socket and we're removing the phaser bolt. This is the cam bolt. And so we're going to go ahead and remove this. Now this phaser bolt is a one-time use bolt. And it's also an actuator, so you want to be very careful with it and get a new one. And it is different from 2018 or 2017 up, so make sure you're getting it for the right year.
Okay, so walking the chain off, basically one link at a time, we're pushing it back and getting it off of these teeth. We're also trying to hold the chain upward so it doesn't come off the lower sprocket if possible. Okay, so the bottom flathead's holding it as we're walking it up and around. Okay, so there it is. Took a little bit of prying, tooth at a time. Just walked it off. Now we're gonna hold this up. And we're gonna try to keep it from dropping. There we go. So.
Now most people just drop the chain down in there. They don't really care. We're just trying to keep it in the same spot. It's not the end of the world if it does come off, because we're going to align the timing when we put it back together. You will want to put zip ties around your cam phaser so it doesn't unwind. Be careful with that. Next, we're removing the high pressure fuel pump lifter. So 13 millimeter, and this just pulls right up. You will see there is a hole on the side that points towards the passenger side. That's how we'll put it back in.
Passenger side.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take our T40 Torx. And so we're going to come up here to this plate that holds the cam in. And so we're going to go ahead and break these loose. So we went ahead and made an alignment mark. You'll see that that nub on the cam was about the 9 o'clock position. We'll remove our plate. And if you look at the backing, the seal on this is pretty flat. So I'm glad I got a new one. Now as we start to pull the camshaft out, we want to be really careful not to drag the cam lobes across the camshaft bearings. So as you're coming through here, you'll start to pull it, and what you want to do is stabilize it by lifting at the very front of the cam. You can put a screwdriver in the front of the camshaft too to help you with some leverage to lift it up and down. But we want to make sure that as this is coming out that we're being very gentle as we come across each of the cam bearings. So once you remove the cam, then you want to check all those cam bearings and clean them out. Just make sure everything's cleaned down in here the best that you can. So as we pulled our cam out, we did make it. It was pretty tight up against the AC condenser. So just make sure that you're careful getting that out not to damage the AC condenser. So here's our new camshaft with our part number. It's a factory replacement, just without the DOD. And something I would highly suggest is looking through the hole on the cam to make sure that it's clear that during the machining process that nothing was stuck in there. So we want to put our assembly lube on this. So we're going to go ahead and start lubing up every part of this. And you'll notice as you start to push the cam in, it will scrape a lot of this off because the clearances are so tight. But we're going to go ahead and slowly walk this in, and the same thing, we're being very careful as we're pushing this through not to drag it across the cam bearings. And we just want it to go in nice and slow, nice and smooth. And this is where you can also, again, put a bolt or the front of a screwdriver in the very front of the cam to help you leverage it and hold it up. So as we're looking down in here, we're watching it go into place. We're putting assembly lube on it again since it wiped a lot of it off, and just making sure that it's nice and clean. So as you see, I have a screwdriver here that's helping me kind of leverage this up and lift the end of the cam on the back so it slides in properly. So here's our new camshaft plate, and you can see how the seal is so much taller on the new one. The old one, it was pretty much flat. We're lining up our alignment marks just to put them in the same place for reference. We're going to go ahead and put some blue Loctite on the hardware and reinstall the cam plate. Now on this cam plate, the torque spec can vary. It's 11 to 18 foot-pounds, somewhere within there. Remember that some are countersunk, some have bolt head ends, so make sure you're getting the right spec. Check your operator manual. Now we're going to do our high pressure fuel pump lifter, and so we're comparing it to the old one. It has the cap on the top. Make sure that it has that. We're going to put the hole towards the passenger side, and it came already somewhat pre-assembled like this, so just make sure that that bearing is going the correct way. We're going to put some assembly lube on it, and that roller just needs to make sure that it's going to roll on the cam, so it should be pretty apparent. We're going to go ahead and put some Loctite on this and torque it down. And so that's going to be 108 inch-pounds, so it's not a very tight one. Next, we're taking mineral spirits and we're cleaning off our new lifters. And immediately after cleaning them off, we're blowing them off with a little compressed air, and then we're letting them soak in brand new motor oil. So now with the plate installed, that nub should be about the 3 o'clock position. And so that's the position where we're going to have the arrow pointing straight down. You'll see other people install it, and that nub's at the 9 o'clock position with the arrow pointed up on the timing mark. Okay, we're going to bring our phaser in. We got our white, blue, and red mark. So we're basically going to just start lining it back up on the chain. If you look on the back, there is one hole that's bigger. That's what lines up on our camshaft. And the nub right there that you can see. So we're just going to make sure that that lines up. Okay, so we're putting the chain on from the front so we can pry it on towards the back like this. And we are making sure our marks are lining up as we're going and working it back on. Okay, working our way around, one tooth at a time. Now, the marks that we made don't guarantee that the timing is going to be correct. We set this up this way so that they would line up pretty much where it was, because we had the crankshaft that we had not turned. But what we're going to have to do is rotate this cam phaser actually one tooth over. The chain must have moved one tooth on the crankshaft side down below. We're still at top dead center. We have the crank locked, so we know it hadn't moved. But if you look at our arrow, it's off to the side. So we have to move this over and move it basically counterclockwise one tooth in order to have our timing be back on. So again, the chain doesn't really matter where it goes on. There's no dots on the chain itself. You just need to make sure that when it's all together, that arrow is pointing straight down again, where it would be pointing to the crankshaft dot. Now, as we go to align this, you'll see the little nub that we're trying to line up on the back of that cam phaser. And so what we like to do is basically set it just a little bit higher, push it with a screwdriver just barely down, and then put that phaser back on and see if we can get it to lock into place. So in order to get that nub to line up, what we like to do is just move it slightly a little bit higher, and then you're pushing down on the cam lobe to get the cam lobe to twist a little bit, and you're also pushing forward on the cam so that it's up against this, and then you can feel it lock into that place. Then when you turn this, when you hear that and you see the cams moving, you know that that nub's made it into the back there. So I can't stress this enough, because there's going to be enough pressure on the camshaft when you put the bolt in that you might think that the cam is locked in, but it might not be in that hole. So make sure that that nub has gone into the cam phaser hole for sure. You know, push forward on the cam as you're lining it up, but just by tightening down the bolt, you might think that it's in that nub, and you really want to make sure that it has gone in. So again, now you'll notice our timing arrow is pointing directly down where it should be for the crankshaft, and our alignment marks are now off by a tooth, and that's okay. Next, we went to install our cam phaser bolt, but what we found out was this one did not fit because it was for 2019 plus, and ours is a 2015. Here they are side by side. The lower one, notice how it has that extra hole in the nose part, and it's a little thinner. That's 2015, and then the thicker one up top is for 2019. So the 2019 plus is this part number right here, the 126-97047. So make sure you're getting that if you have a 2019 plus. They have changed it. And as for the other one, we had 126-81018 is the factory one. That one has an updated part, 127-34067, and those two are the same bolt for 2015 up to 2018. But do your research too to make sure that something has not changed and you're getting the right one. So we went ahead and got ours, and we're going to go ahead and put this in. It is a one-time use bolt, so we want to torque it down right. So we have it going in here just to line things up. So we're going to go underneath the vehicle. We're going to remove the crankshaft holding tool that goes on the flywheel, and that way we can rotate the engine around and double check things, and then we'll put that back on.
And now our timing marks, yep, right at the top and top dead center for the other stroke. Now top dead center, about there, right there. So it's, see where we're at on top dead center. Yep, straight up. Looks good. Okay, now we're reinstalling this to help hold the crank still, so we're going to put that bolt in, just get it threaded, then start to thread the other bolt, and watch these teeth, make sure they match.
Something I found very useful as you're getting this tool to be installed and it's not meshing with the teeth just right, if somebody else can wiggle that crankshaft back and forth with that 24mm socket, it helps walk those teeth into place as you bolt them down. Okay, we're just putting a little bit of pressure on that tensioner and then popping this out. Go ahead and release it. Now we have tension on our chain.
Now we're gonna torque this down. Okay, so we're gonna go 48 foot-pounds first, and then we're gonna do an additional 90 degrees. Okay. Okay, so we made a little paint mark here. We need to turn the socket until it gets to here, which is 90 degrees. So one continuous sweep. So I'll be turning it, and my brother will tell me when I get to that mark. Right, a little more. Right there. Top dead center still.
Next, I wanted to check some of these passages, and my only regret was this coat hanger was actually like rubber coated, and so it did kind of tear up a little bit and leave tiny little pieces in here. So if you're doing this, make sure you do it with like a wire coat hanger with no coating on it. I had to go back and clean it up. So next we have our lifter trays, and so what we're going to do is take our lifters that have been soaking, and we're going to go ahead and look on each side. It has arrows. They claim that it doesn't matter which side you put this in, so you might want to double check that for your own knowledge. But we're going to go ahead and put these lifters in, and so they just kind of sit down here in the trays. Next, we're bringing in our lifter trays with the lifters installed, and the trays really only go in one direction, so you can't really get it wrong, but you see the notches on the bottom and the tray fits right in there. So we're going to go ahead and press this firm and make sure that these are nice and seated.
Blue Loctite, 106 inch-pounds.
With all the lifter trays installed, we're now taking these Q-tips, and you can see how much oil and junk are down inside these holes. So I actually decided to use compressed air, and I'm glad I did. Watch how much oil still sprays out of here that's down in those holes. And you know hydraulic pressure is pretty firm, so you don't want to put the bolt down in there and compress the oil and everything that's down there. So clean them out. I have actually heard of people cracking the block by leaving oil and moisture down in there and then driving the bolt down and torquing it so tight that the hydraulic pressure actually cracks the block. So make sure that is cleaned out. I'd do the compressed air if I were you. Next, we cleaned up the block. I used a microfiber with brake parts cleaner, rubber scraper, got it as clean as I could. There's a lot of controversy about this, about using metal, not scratching it, or using a sanding block to get it true. So do what you feel is best. You might want to research that topic a little bit more, but we want to just make sure that these surfaces are clean and don't have any high spots where the gasket won't seal properly. And so we got that cleaned up the best we could. Next, I decided to clean up the intake ports from all the gunk.
Okay, mineral spirits. Filled it up. Got our little brush here. Cleaning out all these ports.
Okay, next we just cleaned out the inside here. I used compressed air. I also blew out the mineral spirits in the intake ports. There are these dowels, and you want to pull these out of the cylinder head and then make sure that they're on the block. And so we're just going to lightly tap these until they go in. Next, we decided to change our spark plugs. With an impact, you could see how much junk just shot out into the cylinder. So it's not a good idea to use an impact unless the cylinder head is off. We then went through and cleaned out the threads. You know, this is something we would not do if the cylinder head was on the car, just for debris getting into the engine. But we have the good advantage of being able to do it this way and blow everything out with compressed air and get everything right.
(132 inch-pounds, 11 foot-pounds).
Now, if you're doing this job with the injectors and the fuel rails still installed, we're going to want to put our Vlom cover back on first. Luckily, I caught this before the cylinder head was torqued down. I had to lift it up slightly to get this to come in.
First of all, if you have your injectors on, make sure you put this plate on before the head. Okay, so we're going to go on this sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we're going to go 7, 8, and then the 9th one. 11 foot-pounds first, then we're going to go back through to 22 foot-pounds.
Next, it was time for our head gaskets.
6.2
and so this has 6.2 liter. You want to make sure you have the right ones, and then front. They are the same head gasket for each side, so you got to flip them around, but we want to make sure that we're putting this on in the right direction. This is why it's also good to have those dowels that are ready to go, and so we have those set in place. Now we can bring in our cylinder head. You may also notice that I'm not at top dead center on that cylinder number 1, and the reason why is because there was some carbon buildup on the top of those pistons still, and so I rotated the crank until none of the pistons were at top dead center. That way none of that extra debris or any of the buildup would keep this cylinder head from seating properly. So we just went ahead and made sure that all the cylinders were pretty much down, and then we set this right into place.
I think that laid down nicely. Here is a good place to kind of start it, just to kind of hold it in place. Okay, now to tighten down the head bolts, we have them all in, but we're gonna first do 59 foot-pounds, and then we're gonna go back through again and do 90 degrees. So we're gonna turn the bolt an additional 90 degrees. Then for this hex bolt, after that, we're gonna do another 40 degrees, and then the rest of them are going to be 60 degrees. So that's what we're doing, and then the sequence is gonna start at the top here. It's gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, then back to the front, 5, 6, then 7 is the very back bolt, and then 8, the back lower bolt, and then 9, this one with the hex, and 10. So we're going in that same pattern each time around, but we're gonna go through and do 59 foot-pounds, then we're gonna go through and do 90 degrees, and then we're gonna go back through the last time and do 60 degrees, except for this one will be 40 degrees. There you go.
Now we're going to do this again for the other side. Now is a good time to reattach all the grounds that go on the back of the cylinder head. I really didn't want to do these as the head was going in because I wanted to make sure that the head was seating perfectly fine without any problems.
Okay, cylinder head's in place. We're just snugging down all the bolts. Okay, so we're gonna do our torque sequence. The same as the other side, there's just no hex bolt. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then an additional 90 degrees, and then an additional 60 degrees. Okay, with the tab. Okay. Ground. It's nice and tight.
I went with Brian Tooley Racing, and they are very knowledgeable. They were very helpful to me, and they told me since I had LS7 lifters that I should get the 7.80 push rods, which stock is 7.85, so it's a little bit smaller. Next, we're taking some thread sealant, and we're going to go ahead and put this in here. We're going to clean these out first. You saw how much oil came out of the head bolt stud area, so these had some, as you see, as I'm spraying this out. So it's just a good idea to clean these out so that we can torque the bolts down properly. We're going to put some assembly lube on the edge of the push rod. As we drop it down into here, push it, and it will pop down. So we just want to make sure that these are fully seating, and then some assembly lube on the top of those. I like to just put some down here in the cap and then just kind of dip both ends. That seemed to work out a lot easier And so again, we just drop these down in here, and you'll push it, and a lot of times you feel it click into place. So go ahead and put the push rods in on the other side as well. Next, we're adding assembly lube to the top of each of these valves. And as for the rockers, it's a good idea to clean off all the oil that's on there and thread these in until that bolt is sitting loose. Otherwise, it's harder to line it up. So you'll know what I mean as you tighten this down and it's kind of loose and jiggling around a little bit. That helps line it up into the cylinder heads. Next, we're going to rotate the crank, so make sure that the flywheel holding tool's out so you can move it. And we're going to start with a timing arrow pointed straight up. Now, something that's very important to cover is on this particular GM engine, the cylinders are laid out like so. The driver's side front is number 1, the passenger side front is number 2, then it goes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now that's different from other engines. The Ford engines go 1, 2, 3, 4, all starting on the passenger side. Then the driver's side is 5, 6, 7, 8. So it does change by manufacturer, by engine. So make sure that your engine and the firing order, everything, that they have it laid out that way so that you are following this proper sequence. Now, next we're going to torque down these rocker arms. I've heard people just say that they tighten them all down, rotate the crank, tighten them again. We're going to follow a specific procedure that's outlined, but you do need to know the cylinder order. But more importantly, you just need to know which of the rocker arms are loose as you're tightening them down. Up. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the intake valves on cylinders 1, 3, 4, and 5. Then we're going to do that to 22 foot-pounds. Then we're going to go to the exhaust valves for cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 7, and cylinder 8,
does that
22 foot-pounds. And so that's where these should be. I've seen people just put these rockers on and tighten them all down at the same time, but this is just helping so you're tightening them down without any spring tension on it from the valve. So we're going to go ahead and tighten it down.
And then 8.
Then we're going to rotate the crank, and we're going to basically do the opposite. Now, with the valves closed and rotating this crank on the ones that don't have the push rods, you'll notice it's really hard to turn the crank. So you can take spark plugs out if you want to help with that. So we're going to rotate it with that arrow pointed down now, and then we're going to go ahead and switch over to doing intake valves for cylinder number 2, cylinder number 6, cylinder number 7, and cylinder number 8, 22 foot-pounds, and the exhaust valves for cylinder number 3, cylinder number 4, cylinder number 5, and cylinder number 6, 22 foot-pounds. Then we're going to rotate everything and just make sure that it's lining up the way that it should. Next, we're taking a 24mm socket, and looking back, wish I would have done this while the Vlom was off, or as I was taking it off. We're going to go ahead and replace our oil pressure sensor, just because it's something good to have as a replacement. Along with the sensor, we're going to take our 8mm Allen, and we're going to remove this plug at the top and take out the little screen that's in there. It's known as a lifter oil screen filter. And so we're going to go ahead and remove this plug. Now with the plug removed, we can look down in and we can see our little filter down in there. And so the best way to get this one out is to get a little pick or something small and just fish it out. It is pretty loose in there once you pop it loose. I think the older generations had a O-ring that really wedged it in here. So it would spin around quite a bit, and it took a little fishing to get this out. We want to make sure nothing gets stuck down in there. But I was able to pull this out and drop it a few more times. It did put a little hole in the screen, but I did want to make sure I did not have any kind of metal shavings in here from the lifter that had failed. So we used a vacuum and a straw and tried to vacuum things out. So again, this is something I wish I would have done with the Vlom off of the car. Next, we're going to drop this screen filter down in here, and we just have it going that same direction on the top. We want to make sure we don't crush it when we put the plug in. We'll take some Teflon tape and put it on this plug. You want to start with a few of the threads of the plug exposed at the bottom because they're going to thread first, and then wrap it. So as you can see, it'll start to thread this way, and then we can tighten this down. So just make sure that it gets down good and snug, but you're not crushing that cap and breaking the plastic pieces. We're going to take our new oil pressure sensor, and so this is the part number that came out. It was a little bit different. It's probably a revised part from the one that came off. So we're going to thread this one, and it already had some Teflon on. And then we took our 15/16 was the socket size that seemed to work best for that one, and put it in snug. Now underneath the vehicle, we're draining the oil, so not from the differential. That kind of looks like it's coming out of the diff there. But we're going to drain the engine oil, and we're going to clean out everything for the oil pan. So we want to flush anything that came down in the oil pan out of here. So now that we've drained the oil, we can actually see some little pieces of gasket maker and such that are down in there. So we have a straw with our shop vac on the end of it, and we're getting down and we're vacuuming out anything that we can find. You can see this little piece of gasket maker that made its way down in there. Next, we took the oil that we used to soak our lifters, and instead of just throwing it out, we poured it down in here to help flush out anything that was still down in there. And as you can see, it was coming out pretty clear.
Nice and clean.
So we just wanted to flush out any contaminants that we can that might be dropping down into the oil pan.
That looks really good.
During our repair. We also took some motor oil and we put it on the timing chain. This whole area, we want that to be well lubricated. Next, we're going to put our high pressure fuel pump in, so we have the tool for that, and this is it. So basically, with this one, we're going to set it down inside where the high pressure fuel pump will go, and that lifter is going up and down. So we don't need the tool if our timing cover is still off, but I'll show you how this works anyway. As you rotate the crank, you're going to see it lift that tool up, and so the tool is no longer flush. And that's the camshaft lobe. Obviously, that lifter is starting to lift it up, and the tool gets stuck. You kind of have to tap it down. But as our timing mark comes around, we're not quite at top dead center. You'll see that the tool is still lifted up and not flush. As we come down to where we're at top dead center with that arrow pointing down, you'll see the tool is flush. And what that means is we can install our high pressure fuel pump without hurting the spring. So just a little flashback. You saw how we lined everything up here. When that dot's there are arrows down, that means that the camshaft lobe for the high pressure fuel pump will be flat. So you don't want it up in the up position like this where it's putting pressure on the high pressure fuel pump as we install it. So you want it on one of the flat lobes, which is going to be pretty much at top dead center. So the tool helps us see that. And here, a little flashback here, this is the new fuel pump roller. You can see you don't want it on that high spot. So as we rotate the crankshaft and we watch this tool drop back down and go flush, that's when we're going to be able to install our high pressure fuel pump. And again, sometimes on the tool you got to tap it on the top to get it to sit flush, and because it lifts it up and it kind of gets bound. So here we are with our new high pressure fuel pump. I bought a new one because I'd heard seals can wear out. You get check engine lights for it overfueling and then having issues. So I was at this point, we put a new one in. But you want to set this fuel pump in here and get it level. It's kind of hard to do that because you have the bracket that's higher on one side than the other. So you want to run both of these bolts down until they're evenly flush, then start tightening them down evenly. So as you can see, there's a little spring tension, but we know that we have our clearance.
We're going even. Okay. 216 inch-pounds, or I think that was like 18 foot-pounds.
Next, we're going to use the AC Delco RTV engine sealant for the front timing cover, and it is the bottom part of the oil pan too. So we're going to go around and put a nice little bead around the whole thing. The one tube was sufficient. We did it on the cover. We also did it down on the oil pan, and we went around the top too, just in a thin layer. And it's okay if we have a little excess coming out as long as it's not a lot that's going into the engine. So we went ahead and got this nice bead formed all the way around here, not missing any gaps. And now we're going to be able to take the timing cover and set it right up against the engine and put in the bolts.
Okay, so we are gonna lift this cover, make sure we put this cord back into its clip. Then once it's lifted, I'm gonna put the rest of the RTV right where that was, and we're just gonna put the cover on.
Now this is very critical when reinstalling. These longer bolts have to go in where they're supposed to. The shorter ones have to go in where they're supposed to. Some people have put the longer bolts in higher up, and it's actually damaged the cylinder as it pushes in too far. So the two bolts at the bottom are going up into the oil pan, and then these longer ones here on the side are the first ones in on the very bottom of the timing cover, so don't mix that up. Now when you look at your hardware, some of the bolts came out and they left that little plastic little collar inside the timing cover or inside the block even. So you just want to look for those and make sure that you're not doubling them up.
Okay, torquing sequence for this. We're looking at the top ones, not the ones that are going up into the oil pan.
We did thread the bottom ones up in there though, so all of them are in. We're just going to torque them down with the front cover.
18 foot-pounds. All right, one above from the bottom is where we're starting. 1, 2, 3, 4, down here, 5, 6, 7, 8, then 9, 10.
Then torque the bottom two that were going up from the oil pan up in, so don't forget those two.
10.
Once the timing cover is installed, it's a good time to put on our vacuum pump, and so this is the model number and everything. It was slightly different than what came off the car, so it might be an updated version. And this is a good thing to upgrade just because you have everything apart. And I have also heard that when these fail, they can put some metal shavings into the engine, so time for a new one. We're going to go ahead and put a little bit of the blue thread locker on these bolts, and we're going to go ahead and thread them back in. Very simple on this one. There's just 4 bolts. So we're just going to mount it back up. We made sure that that metal gasket was on there, and it came that way from the factory with extra new hardware. So we're going to go ahead and torque these down. There's just 4 of them, so 2 on each side, just the way that it came off.
There you go.
Next we'll take off this little cap for our vacuum hose, and so as you remember, as this goes on, it has a little lock on it. Be careful with the hose because it is a plastic one, so you don't want to crack it. So we're going to go ahead and push this on, and then we're going to put the clip up over it. There was also this harness little Christmas tree that we just put back into place. There was the ground that went right above this, so we're going to go ahead and install that now. Next came our wiring harness with 2 Christmas tree clips in the front. And at some point we had taken this bolt out that just holds that wiring harness in place. We were able to get it past this vacuum pump by undoing one of the other bolts on. Now as we reinstall the crank pulley dampener, we're going to have to reinstall our flywheel holding tool again so that it's not moving. So I know you're taking this tool and putting it on and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off, but this is essential to make sure that as we go to crank down the crankshaft bolt, which is going to have 250 foot-pounds and degrees and everything that we're doing on it, that the flywheel does not move. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall this tool. And again, as you remember, the teeth aren't flush in the beginning, and then as you kind of wiggle it and tighten it back down, they will tighten back up into place. So make sure the tool is properly seated so you don't strip any of the flywheel teeth, and just make sure that it's good and flush and ready to go. Bolts on it and get it back in there. So now we're taking a little dab of RTV and we're just putting it right here in the nose of the crank pulley. So the crank pulley will push most of this back out of the front. We're going to line it up on our keyway here, and we're going to go ahead and install this back on. We did also put a nice coat of motor oil around this as well to help it go in and be good against that rubber sleeve. So this is a press fitting of attachment. Now we do want this to go on evenly, and if you use your stock bolt, you run the risk of having just a barely few threads on there pulling on it, and you don't want to strip those out. So there is a press tool here, and so this is what it looks like as it's installed. You have this rod that will go into the crank, then you have the first washer. This was an upgraded one, so it actually came with a bearing, and that's this piece here in the middle. So the bearing part just kind of helps it spin as you thread it in. So this bearing was also disassembled. So as you see, you sandwich this back together. You have a washer on the front, the bearing, then the washer on the back. And so we're going to thread this in, and then we can tighten that balancer on. And so we're going to go ahead and thread this one in. This back end with the hex end is what you want on your end, so you could turn it with a wrench. And so basically it's turning in like this, and then as you go to tighten it, it's helping pull on the threads of the new bolt rather than just the very front threads of the old balancer bolt. So this is just a better way to do this without risking stripping the threads. So here it is coming off, so you can see its orientation again. Okay, yeah. So we have the nut here. Behind it we have the first washer. Then we have the bearing. So that was in pieces is the way that this one came. And then the last washer, and then you simply unthread it back out of the crankshaft.
So I'll put the nut on there.
Now before we take our new balancer bolt, we're going to put the old one back in. And what we're going to do is torque this down to 250 foot-pounds, which is basically the max of this torque wrench. And so then we're going to remove it, and what that did was properly seat the balancer all the way. Now we have our new balancer bolt, so this is a one-time use bolt. So step one is to tighten it to 89 foot-pounds. Next we're going to put a mark on it, and what we need to do is loosen it 360 degrees, so one full rotation. As soon as you go to about 90 degrees, it's going to be loose anyway, but we're going to go ahead and spin it like it says and line it back up so it's 360 degrees loosened.
Right about there.
Okay, now we're going to go and tighten it down to 59 foot-pounds. Once we're done with 59 foot-pounds, we're going to do 125 degrees. So we pulled up the compass, and you could see where that would be on it. And that puts it about the 4 o'clock position from where it is. So with the white dots now, that's where we need to turn it after it's been torqued down. So this is being done. You try to do this in one sweep at the same time without multiple, but sometimes that's not possible. But you just want to try to turn this, and it will be pretty tight to get it to that 125 degrees.
Okay, go ahead and remove our flywheel holding tool now.
We'll bring in our dust shield here for the starter. Just has that little 10mm bolt that goes into the side there. Tighten that one down. Now we're going to just take our starter and push it forward until the holes line up. Now our starter bolts, just go straight in from the bottom.
Bolt it up, and the heat shield on the side.
We're going to go ahead and clean up our exhaust ports here. So we have our Scotch pad, and just gently going and cleaning up around these ports, make sure it's a nice clean mating surface. We're going to do the same on the exhaust manifolds themselves. Here's our new exhaust gaskets here. So here's the part number for those. They are the same. They just need to be put on exhaust manifold side, which would be the side facing outward. So we just want to make sure we put those on towards the exhaust manifold. We got some new exhaust manifold bolts, so it's great to have new hardware. The old ones were pretty heat treated and rusted, so these look great. Now remember to put your dipstick tube through before you put this manifold in place. Okay, so once it's on there, we're making sure the gasket is going through the bolts, and then we're going to go ahead and torque it down on each side. As we're torquing this down, we're doing the inner bolts and then working our way to the outside bolts. The spec was 17 to 20 foot-pounds, I believe, on this one. Then repeat on the other side. Just make sure those gaskets are exhaust manifold side out and in the right direction. Our steering shaft, we're going to go ahead and slide it back on here. We can see where our marks had lined up before. And we're going to slide it back over the bottom as well. Make sure you haven't turned the steering wheel or done anything that would set this off. Now we're going to put in our two 15mm bolts. This one has the little captive bolt, so you can just tighten that one down. And we're just using a ratcheting 15 and a regular 15. And then the bottom one is also two 15mm. I'm going to go ahead and tighten those down. Next, we're going to get our new water pump. And, you know, I tried to put all the good parts back on here, and sure enough, this one showed up damaged. So we did our best with it. I was thinking about returning it or swapping the piece over from the old one, but we put a socket down here, bent it back out. So kind of sucks, but we probably should have claimed it. But we went ahead and put our gaskets on, so make sure that you do have the water pump gasket. Still had some paint pen left, so we put it there. Went ahead and torqued these ones down.
216 inch-pounds or 18 foot-pounds.
Next, we installed the bracket here on the side of the water pump. There's one on the top of the water pump as well, as we follow this harness down, and one right next to the thermostat.
Put that click lock in there. And this one, I want to lock, but
Push it in and push.
There we go. Yeah. And this little Christmas tree into there. Christmas tree into there. Then we have our temperature sensor. Yeah. That one's there, and I need a piece.
Now we're doing our heater core ones. Any of these that you have disconnected, we're going to just push them back on and they will click into place.
Clicked on. Click. Right side. Right side. Left side. Left side. Okay. I'm going to lift the compressor up so it's here. Okay, for the alternator bracket, we put the 15mm bolt in here and here. That's going into the cylinder head. So then what we're going to do is lift the air conditioning compressor up into place. So we're going to lift it up first so the left side aligns. See how it has to go behind that. So here's our bolt. It's got to go in the front here and then into the back of that one there. Right here. Okay. That's good. Now for this stud, we have our nut off of it. We have a 5mm socket that will go on the tip of this in order to put this in. So it's important that all of this isn't completely bolted down so that there's enough wiggle room that this goes in and can still find that thread. Kind of wiggle it and push it. Okay, 13mm there. Compressor. Now our nut goes on. There we go. AC compressor's on.
Next, we're going to put on our stretch belts. So you want to do this first one for the vacuum pump. It has to go on first, or the other belts, it won't go past them. So what we did is put a zip tie around the edge of it. And then as we rotate the crank, it will pull this stretch belt back onto place.
Okay, ready?
So as you see here, we're going to turn the crankshaft, and just don't get your fingers or anything caught in this as you're turning it. As you can see, it's walking it right onto the pulley there, and the zip tie is just holding it in place. So now as we rotate the crank, it will find its way onto that pulley.
There we go. It's on. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay, put the...
Now you can also use the zip tie method on the crankshaft pulley for the AC one, but I do have this tool that came with the belt. That's why if you go to GM, they charge you a lot for the AC belt because it comes with the special tool. So check the video description. I'll put how I did it with the zip ties as well if you don't have this special tool. If you do have this special tool, you just basically set it on here, and as you turn the crankshaft, it just goes around with it and walks it all the way on, and then it comes out the other side. So watch the left hand side on the AC compressor, because as it's starting to stretch it on here, it likes to walk it off on the AC compressor. So you kind of got to be watching both at the same time. Again, don't get your fingers caught up into any of this. And then as you rotate this and they both go on, that tool just comes out the bottom side.
Dad.
Okay, drop the radiator back into place. Make sure that this line is coming from behind the condenser to the front. And now we're just sliding these clips back on. Put that in the channel. Just grab this to come around until it pops right in.
Next, we're just looking at all of our transmission cooler lines on this side. We're looking at the coolant lines on the right hand side as well, and we're putting the radiator in place with our two 15mm bolts. Next comes in the cooling fan, electric fan, and it takes a little wiggling. You gotta get it down here at certain angles and watch those hoses. It would probably be better to put this on before the hoses if you can help it. That might help you a little bit. Otherwise, it's a bunch of wiggling around. Next, we have our fans, and so just remember one of these plugs goes on upside down compared to the other one. So line them up and put them in. The lower radiator hose has a clip that just pushes into the fan. Now we also have our main clips back here for our fuel system. So we're going to make sure that those both go in and that the locks go into place. Those are usually attached to the fuel rail. I'm just going to leave them not on there because it really had to pull them tight to get them on there. We have our high pressure fuel pump clip. Just click that one on, and there's no lock on that one. I believe it just popped back on. Now here are our one-time use fuel lines, so we had to replace these. We're going to go ahead and take these off. Make sure you don't drop anything in the intake ports right now. So this is a ball and fitting setup. I don't know if I should have put a little bit of sealant in here or not. It didn't say to on the other sources that I saw, so we're going to go ahead and just thread these on. If they're tight, they should be okay. We're going to go ahead and wipe off any oil that was in there, and so we're going to go ahead and thread these on. This is where we're going to need a crow's foot. So you can see the ball goes in, so it's on pretty tight. Again, if you want to use some thread sealant, that might be a good idea. And so here we're going to torque this down to 22 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead with our crow's foot and get the most accurate that we can on those. It's not the best with a crow's foot for accuracy. Then we have our last line that's going to come back on here. I'm going to thread them on. Same torque spec, 22 foot-pounds on that. So just make sure that the ball goes in nice here, and go ahead and tighten this down. They again are one-time use lines is what they claim. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down.
Okay.
Now we'll tighten down the bolt that's on top for the fuel rail system here. We then came in with our high pressure fuel pump here, took the cap off and put the line back on. This one was nice, it just pushes into place, so you'll hear it click. Pull back on it just to make sure that it's on there snug. And we're going to go ahead and put the retainer clip on here. Next we're going to look at our intake manifold gaskets. These are all individual, and if you look at them, they do have a pattern here that faces downward. So here's the part number. And the new ones, it just looks like the casting was a little off on them as far as where that mark was. They are probably reversible, but we're just putting them in exactly how they were from the factory. So we're putting that little nub on the back of them facing downward. Next, we came in with our little blanket pad here. I actually left this off, and with it off, you will hear that direct injection a lot louder. So I won't recommend not putting it back on, but in the end, I was fitting it and everything, and just decided to leave it off so I could check up on that fuel lines there.
I'm gonna torque this down evenly, going from the inside and out. So we're gonna go ahead and start with this one right here in the middle. This is the bolt 1. We're gonna do our first pass at 44 inch-pounds. Then we're gonna go back and do 89 inch-pounds. So very light torque here. So I went through and already did both steps, but I'm showing you we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Next, we installed this piece. You didn't have to take this one off, but we wanted to see what the switch looked like, so we had removed it so we didn't break anything. So we just went ahead and plugged that back in. Now it came over to this ground here. This is going in towards the front of that alternator bracket. Here's another look at that bolt there for the ground, just so you know where that one was. Now we're going to bring in our alternator. You have a longer bolt on the left, the shorter one on the right. This one is wedged in there kind of well. You may have remembered when we removed it, we kind of had to use a pry bar to get this out of here. So we're going to set this down in here the best that we can, but it will take a little bit of tapping. We got a rubber mallet to give it some persuasion. Just kind of hit it down, see how it goes in. On the left-hand side, we got it mounted first and just put the bolt in, but not tighten. Then a few whacks with a rubber mallet, and we started to work it down into the other side there. As we were whacking it, we were also pushing that bolt in, and eventually it found its way. So just be careful with it. You don't want to cross-thread anything, but we got both of those bolts in. Now we had a bolt here on the side of the alternator bracket that goes to this bracket that holds the AC unit away from it. Then came through and plugged in our alternator, plugged in the throttle position, sensor throttle body thing here. Put the clip in. We had another bracket here, so this goes right on the front of the cylinder head. This is for the alternator itself, for the wire as it kind of comes up in here. Okay, so as you see, it fits down in there a certain way. Now we'll tighten down our alternator power wire here. Again, make sure that the battery is not connected at this time. And there was a little lip on the side of that that goes down in there. Tensioner, we have a nub here that goes in to line this up like a little dowel pin. So we'll go ahead and line the tensioner up and put it in. We're going to start hooking up any of these coolant hoses that we can find that go back to the radiator. These are coming from the expansion tank, working their way over. We have this coolant line that's going down onto the thermostat.
Make sure you don't forget this little flange. Okay, that flange goes on the exhaust manifold side. So just make sure it's in place before you lift the exhaust into place. It can fall out. Okay, putting the exhaust back on. Passenger side, this is fixed, so it's best to line this side up first. Sometimes you gotta put your foot on the muffler and kind of push it back. Right here, it kind of gets hung up, so lift it up and push it back so you get your clearance. Then over on this side, it's more of a collar one, so then when you're ready, you can move that one into place. And they're 15mm nuts to put back on. Okay, we have the nuts on here and they're still loose, they're just on. You want to put these ones on too, so that everything's just on. Don't tighten down one side and then the other, or it'll be hard to line up. Then basically just kind of put your chest right under here, push up against it and tighten these down. Just do it evenly.
I also opted for a magnetic drain plug, and it did leak a little bit when we were all said and done, so I don't know if I just didn't crush the copper one hard enough. It was 17 millimeter. I was a little nervous. I didn't want to break something off. And so maybe I needed to also take the other washer off. I'll investigate that a little bit later. This was a 17 millimeter if you decide to go with one of these. I have it on the Tundra and it works well. Make sure, of course, to change your oil filter, and we have drained the oil previously too, so we're going to add new engine oil. That's a step we definitely don't want to miss after all this. So we got our new oil filter hand tight, and our drain plug was in. Next we added our engine oil, 8 quarts. Now we'll put on the main serpentine belts. We're going to start on the water pump, then we're going to go down under the crankshaft, and then we're going to basically have it go over the crankshaft, and this is where we're going to slide it behind the tensioner. Now we'll pull it till it goes over the alternator. This is where we're going to bring in our breaker bar. This is the 1/2-inch drive one. So we'll go ahead and push this in, and as we push down on it, that gives us our tension, and we can slide this right over our alternator. Next came our valve covers.
Okay, put our valve covers back on. We just, to tighten them down, went from the insides and then worked our way out so that the gasket was spread evenly. It's only like 5 foot-pounds, so don't over torque them. And there is a ground on the back there, so make sure that that gets on. And so we just went ahead and did that on both sides. Now we're gonna go through for our coil packs. We're just gonna plug all these in. And then they have the lock on the top that you push down once it's on.
Now as we add the coolant into the system, we're going to start with the radiator. Fill it up first and then do the rest.
So we filled in this hose. It's starting to come out here, so the radiator's full. We're now going to put this onto the water pump. There we go. Put our clamp on here. Now we're going to continue to fill from here and even the degas until it starts coming out of the thermostat. So take the degas one. It's already off, but just remove the cap there. Okay, we're filling, this is a high point, and it's starting to come back up the degas bottle, and it's going to be coming out of here pretty soon at the thermostat.
Now just go back through and look everywhere you can find a clamp for the hoses. There's going to be some on the lower part of the radiator, the upper part, and from the degas bottle, so just follow those all. So just check every hose coming from the radiator and to the engine, make sure that all the clamps are tight. Now at this point, I had my friend come over who was going to turn off the cylinder deactivation. It has to be actually taken out of the system. You can't just plug in your override one or try to just disconnect a vacuum hose that would turn off the 4-cylinder mode. So before we started the vehicle, he came over, adjusted some other tables. That's something that you can have done at a dyno if you want to tow it over there. There are some email options where you can buy a handheld tuner and they will email you a tune. So I'll try to get some more information for that down below. Since my friend could come over and do this, I just had him come do it. But after that, we were ready to start it up.
Do you have oil pressure?
Now there is a lot to look at as this is running. The oil pressure, make sure it's good. The coolant, make sure that you are burping the system if you need to. So you got your eyes full on this, and we don't want to forget about the transmission. So we need to add some transmission fluid for what we lost from the transcooler lines. There are 3 10mm bolts on this heat shield on the passenger side of the transmission. And so what you're going to do is come, and you don't even have to take them all the way out. We just need to drop this down to where we can see this fill plug. So you can use a 10mm bendable head ratchet. Really worked well for these bolts to get up in here. But where that plastic cap is there on the right, that's our fill plug. There is no dipstick tube on the 8-speed, so you're going to pull the top of that cap up to release it. And so once you pop it up like this and it's loose, now we can pull the rest of it out. So you can get a screwdriver up in there, or just be very careful because it is rubber. You don't want to tear it, but eventually we can pop this plug out. And now we're going to bring in a pump, and we're going to pump in some transmission fluid. So I pumped in 1 full quart, and it ended up being too much. I'll show you how we bleed it off in the end anyway, but it's going to be this synthetic LVATF HP. So very important on this step. So we're going to go ahead and pump this in here, and once we put about a quart in there, we put our plug back in. So make sure the plug is up, push it down in, and then press that cap down in. Now we can take our heat shield and we can line it back up with those 10mm bolts, just going back in the side, and then there's 2 of them at the top. Ratcheting wrench again worked really well for this 10mm bendable head. Now what we want to do is put it into tow haul mode. When you push that button, you'll get a temperature sensor that sweeps in, and we just need it coming up warm. It doesn't have to be all the way operating temperature, but you want it warm. So then we're going to take a 10mm socket, and on the very front of the transmission pan there is this overflow plug. So it's not a drain plug. It will drain the fluid, but it's not the pan's regular drain plug. So what you do is you remove it until it's flowing out, and when it turns to just a little drip, that's when you put that back in. Do not burn yourself on the exhaust. Even though I tell you not to, I burn myself. It's down there and it's hot. So anyway, everything else was looking good here. So we decided to take it for a little test drive.
Put a bill down. I'm sure they're a little low from sitting. I drove the temps there, they went pretty good there.
So we got rid of this barking dog. And now have it running perfectly smooth. So hopefully this video helps you out. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and check the video description for more information on all this. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe. I have a whole bunch of videos on the Yukon, and we'll keep you updated. Thanks, guys.